Oh, it's 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and I'm watching Beth Jesus talking to Machine Learning Street Talk. The section is called The Human Brain, a Kick-Ass Thermodynamic Computer at 32 minutes in. The comments are absolutely full of this guy is a grifter. And he's not saying anything, it's hand wavy science. So I thought what I would do is a reaction video, because I am interested in what he's actually got to say. But what I look like is pretty academic, so let's just make that a little bit smaller and stick that in the corner. And away we go, hey?
And so we had a very direct way to go from, hey, I want this energy, here's how I design my circuit, right? And so that's where we started. Furthermore, it was the way to build the most macroscopic thermodynamic computer you can build. Any other companies with claims to build a much more macroscopic thermodynamic computer either did it digitally or emulated it, so it's not a real thermodynamic computer. But we had to super cool it because it's too big, right? And Boltzmann distribution is, as you go smaller, you have higher frequencies, you can go to higher temperature, and then we move to silicon. But to answer your question about energy-based models, you could view our chips as a time-dependent programmable energy function, right? And you have something akin
Programmable energy dependent something function, thermodynamic function. I mean, okay, we'll try and understand what's going on.
To Langevin dynamics, more generally diffusion in that landscape.
Dynamics was that? I think I need to get up the subtitles.
And Langevin dynamics is happens to also be an MCMC algorithm, right? So there's a perfect match there between the algorithm that you can use for Bayesian inference for anything really, and the native physics of the chip, right? And so it's almost like
cool.
It's been there the whole time, right? And it's like we've been doing algorithms that were physics that we could literally implement, right? It's a literal analogy we're instantiating as an analog computer. It's that was too beautiful to not build it. So we did build it. Hopefully we could cut some B-roll. I brought some superconducting chips here. We'll do that later. But now actually I think the big breakthrough and the big challenge was to
That's it, eh?
move to silicon, yeah. And
Wow.
Right. So he whips out some piece of hardware. The interviewer goes, "That's it, huh?" And says, "Wow." And watch what happens.
Getting programmable stochastic physics in silicon was a whole kind of order of magnitude more difficulty, and we had to.
So he puts it away in his pocket, and we just carry on as though he flashed his credit card.
Really innovate in terms of understanding, stochastic mechanics of electrons in silicon, and we built our team for that. And essentially we kind of reproduced some core primitives, namely the one we're talking about for now is the probabilistic bit. And the probabilistic bit you could think of as a double well system, and you can tune the tilt and so on. So if you have if you consider bouncy balls in this landscape, you can control how much time the bouncy balls spend in one well or another, and you can consider one well 0, the other well 1. So essentially you have a signal that's essentially dancing between 0 and 1, right? And you can control how much time it spends in 0 and 1, and so that's like a fractional bit, right? So, going back to...
Right. So his achievement was to build one bit that dances between two states, on or off. So everything I read about machine learning says compute is the limiting constraint. We need vast amounts of energy and vast amounts of compute hardware in order to achieve usable computing, or in order to achieve functionality, useful functionality. And the interviewer has allowed him to waffle for 40 minutes, 35 and a half, whatever, minutes, and it carries on. Now, the interviewer here, I've seen his published papers, the titles of which I'm not even prepared to try to decode what the titles mean. But one guy, well, what I'm basically complaining about is the adulation for your guest. All right? Now, you guys manufacture a channel called Machine Learning Street Talk. And okay, so there's going to be some terminology that I don't understand. There's going to be some hype. There's going to be some things new that are triggering for those of us who've feel we have some handle on what is going on. But you don't press home any kind of get to the point with your guests. An explosion of AI hardware is coming.
We were saying earlier about, coming from qubit, we School of Thought, we basically made p-bit from it, and it initially was superconducting materials, but now we've done p-bits in silicon, and achieved really high.
Okay, so what he claims to have done is take a concept that is a theoretical concept in quantum computing, and he has engineered it in silicon. I think, if I understand correctly, the computing needs to go on at very low temperatures, superconducting temperatures, and you can emulate this in silicon. Right, maybe that's useful, but only if you've got one Google bit of storage or whatever.
Energy efficiencies, our p-bits can generate controllable bits of entropy with only a few hundreds of attojoules. And we've actually, as of recently, submitted our results for peer review, and we're going to put them on archive, probably timed with some other announcements in the coming months. But it's really exciting time. Cool. And
fuck off, is that cool? Look, there's a smile on your face from one side to the other. The guy is claiming a breakthrough, and all you can do is say, that's cool, with no critical analysis of it whatsoever. Now, it's an hour and 23 minutes. Am I going to waste my time on the rest?
Again, this was a concept for a very long time, and it was a big risk for me. You know, initially when I left theoretical physics and went all in on quantum machine learning, everybody told me like, really, you're going to be a quantum machine learning lead at Google, and everybody was doubting me. And then I became kind of well known, and then I eventually led a team. I led quantum machine learning at Alphabet X, and then I quit all that. I quit quantum computing, quantum machine learning. And it's like I'm going to take even more risk. I'm going to build a whole new paradigm of computing from scratch, from the concept up. And I really thought that was crazy. And now we're here. Now we've made a lot of progress, and now we're scaling, right? And because there's nothing stopping us from scaling at this point, because we we've de-risked the manufacturing as well, which is usually not something academics think about. But if you're a startup and you have to scale or die, eat the world or die, you have to kill every risk possible. So we are looking to scale to millions of degrees of freedom next year, and I think we're gonna hit it. So
That's really exciting. So you're
I don't care if you guys think that I'm being hypercritical, and I don't care what he thinks of me or what Machine Learning Street Talk thinks of me, or well, I do. And psychologically, that's what I'm coming to terms with at the moment. Is I convince myself I can follow the argument, but would I hand this guy my money? No way would I advise anybody to even but maybe I've got that wrong. But this is not a discussion amongst equals. This is not a discussion where two people cognizant of each other's limitations are having a useful dialogue and exchange of views. It's adulation in its raw form, and it sets a precedent which is triggering, inappropriate, and a whole lot of other adjectives I could think about. But let's just try to persist, because I don't need to be told an explosion of AI hardware is coming. I'm asking, will the energy impact of artificial intelligence reduce in future, and can it not be engineered in such a way that at the same time as scaling compute the numbers, is there no way that we can reduce the energy demands at the same time as achieving 10 times increase in compute, 10 times less energy? Now he's claiming he can do it 10 to the 6. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And no one is pushing on this in this interview.
first chip, right, had 3 p-bits.
yeah.
And the latest has about 300 degrees of freedom.
Yeah,
correct.
They're
And
not all
now you're-
p-bits,
and
but
now you're aiming right.
we'll get to that someday. Yeah.
Right. And now and millions of degrees of freedom
Yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So help me understand the layout, the general space here. So I mean, presumably, you don't think that this is or do you? Do you think this is a wholesale replacement for the current stack, or do you see like, because I could see a world where like you interface, well, you
Current
use
stack,
thermodynamic.
as though the current stack is a kind of calm down. Get your thoughts in order. Right, the current stack is consuming hundreds of millions of dollars. And in excess of. I mean, how many orders of magnitude that estimate is out, I can't even give you. But let's agree that it is hugely significant in terms of its impact on the planet, in terms of the money follows the energy follows. It's a feedback mechanism in which we've gone absolutely mad. And the ultra competitiveness of it is not democratic. There's no humility.
When it's relevant, but you mesh this with digital and quantum at the appropriate juncture so that you get what you really get is like a multi-scale stack where each hardware bit is specialized for the kinds of computations that run natively on that kind of hardware.
Yeah.
Each hardware bit is optimized for it. This is so contrary to the entire process where we're saying it's no longer efficient in terms of human resources to worry about individual bits. I mean, I've struggled with handling information with tens of millions of bits and scaling to tens of millions of rows of bits in my time. And I know what that means for latency and for speed of getting information out, but information out of data. But giga garbage in, giga garbage out. So triggering this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're I think there was some work from Max Tegmark on correspondences between sort of the information bottleneck.
He thinks there's some work from Max Tegmark on the information bottleneck. He can say it if you take out all of the ums and the ahs. But he doesn't quote the work. He doesn't. The very ums and ahs betray that you probably not even bothered to read the paper and take Tegmark and do a too long didn't read. Now I'm interrupting the flow of the conversation worse than the conversation itself at the moment with the ums and ahs, but But this is the second video this week from this channel that I have gone into in what everybody is happy to call a deep dive. And what I call a deep dive is where's the transcript of what he's saying, scrubbed of all the ums and ahs. Where are the closed captions which actually say what's going on and is not hyped to the tits?
Principle and sort of downsampling and the hierarchy and machine learning and the renormalization group, right? So in physics, you go, you know, if you're trying to learn from quantum mechanics and you downsample, you get statistical mechanics, you downsample, you get to utility mechanics. You can imagine if I had a God neural network that just compressed all the information in a certain region of space, which is actually the thought experiment that got me into quantum machine learning. I was trying to understand black holes as a machine learning system. But let's say you created that system, then you can imagine the first few layers are quantum, and then some layers are probabilistic, and later they're deterministic. Just like as you distill the information, you don't need that sort of, you know, initially you need some quantum complexity, later you need some entropy, and then later you just need to do some classical, coordinate transformations, right? And they all work together. But in a more...
So what did he just say? You start off at the quantum level, and I mean, and then eventually you end up with some matrix transformations on coordinates in multidimensional space. He hasn't even used that expression. This guy is... Now, I don't want to get ad hominem about lean versus flabby. And I am certainly not someone who can talk about being precise with words fast, because the connection between this and this, running this and this at the same time, this guy's not even potty trained.
Practical workflow. Yeah, I mean, you know, very often, whether you're doing simulations of stochastic differential equations, you're trying to simulate a physical system, whether you're doing some sort of discrete or continuous diffusion. There's very often there's a classical function, often differentiable program that determines sort of some probability distribution that you want to sample from, whether it's in latent space or, you know, for these transitions and the denoising. So the two work together. You don't necessarily need entropy everywhere in your graph all at once, right?
Right.
In principle, you could use a probabilistic computer for deterministic operations, but it's not going to be the best at that, right? In the low precision regime, right?
So that sentence contains the statement, effectively, that conventional computing does not map to quantum computing. So everybody is in conventional computing headspace, and he thinks he's got something that is in a different headspace. But this is like talking about, well, I mean, he even said that his inspiration was faster than light travel. And how he drifts in and out of, you know, his latest obsession, and who paid him the most money in the past because he could bullshit. That's 40 minutes in.
You could think of p-bits as literal fractional bits. So you can get into the fractional bit precision work, and so that can be interesting, but not everything is well suited for that low precision. I do think quantum computers will have some applications, but again, they would be supplements for just quantum mechanical systems, to understand quantum mechanical systems as a supplement to probabilistic and classical computers. But I would say that most things are, would be well covered by probabilistic and deterministic representations running on probabilistic and or thermodynamic and deterministic computers. Yeah.
So currently, the superconducting chips require a lot of cooling, right? You need to get them around 1 Kelvin. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the material, you can be a few hundred millikelvin, or you can get to a few Kelvin. A few Kelvin, usually using niobium. I think that you don't need as big of a fridge. For us, it was an interesting sort of experiment, and we have a bunch of results there. A paper coming in the coming months.
We have a paper coming.
Essentially, it's as efficient as we could imagine building a thermodynamic computer. And again, it was just to get people to imagine, hey, actually, or realize rather, hey, actually, there's forms of computing that are far more energy efficient by like an unfathomable amount of orders of magnitude, far more efficient than digital computers.
By what kind of amount? And
right.
Right. Because I'm just doing some back of the napkin. Because so you guys target 1,000 to 100,000 x energy efficiency gains at the chip level, and what I was wondering is how does that discount against the cryogenic energy cost?
Yes,
like,
of course, that's what you're getting.
Yeah. So any sort of anything from those results were, and we put the asterisk there, like that's just the chip, and in general, you'd have the thought experiment was if you scaled a very large network of superconducting chips to football field size, and you had a ginormous dilution fridge, right? Again, it's like the big energy cost is maintaining that boundary, right, with the outside world. If you had a ginormous dilution fridge and you had millions and millions of p-bits and superconductors, you'd have the most energy efficient probabilistic computer, right?
P-bits. Not whatever the subtitles came up with. Nah. Best thing you could have done with this geezer is take him for a walk in the garden and point out a few flowers and say, what's going on in your head?
Is that practical? Probably not. Should a startup be doing it? Probably not either. Could a government do it in some sort of crazy moonshot? Maybe. And so we're kind of just going to put the idea out there for academia, national labs, and whatnot to pick it up. I think for us, it was also just a great learning platform. Superconductors are ironically pretty accessible. A bunch of universities have fabs where you can experiment with them. So for us, it was kind of like, hey, we're going to want a community of people working on thermodynamic computing and experimenting with new primitives and showcasing new algorithms. So we're going to put out that work into academia. But for us, the product is, again, the silicon chips, which, we could have decided to run them in cryo CMOS, but we ended up deciding to go for room temperature.
Second time.
Of course, a thermodynamic computer
that was an opportunity for the engineer to snatch it out of his hand and say, how does this work?
Consumes less energy, right?
And
of course, you're assuming you're maintaining the bath at that temperature,
the trade-off
but then you have the cost of
cooling
the cooling,
and,
right?
and running the thing hot.
If you had a von Neumann probe thermodynamic computer, maybe you could run much cooler, right? If it's going to go in interstellar space, it's not going to encounter that much heat, and so maybe we'd modify the design for that. But that's much problem for in the far future.
And then coming back to impacts on the AI industry, I mean, EBMs have been around, energy-based models, right, have been around for a long time. Would you say that this is really the key to unlocking their potential, because up until now they've been basically limited by their inefficient sampling, right? So would you say that this is really like the technology that we need to really do?
All right, what does that mean? Inefficient sampling in the context of quantum computing. What does that actually mean? Yesterday I was looking at graphical representations of gradient descent and local minima as opposed to a global minima. And I understand that in multidimensional space you need to perform what is it called? Partial differentiation in order to extract a gradient. And obviously there are in 500 dimensions, there are 500 gradients. Now, you take the opposite of the gradient, and that means you go downhill in terms of a trajectory, but you may fall into a local minimum rather than a... Now, okay, so there's a step size function or parameter that you can tune. You're only dealing with 500 dimensions, so you're telling me that you can't find a mathematician who can find the global minimum by taking bigger steps. Well, you have to take big steps, small steps, random size steps. You have to determine whether or not there is a theoretical path where you go down less steep to begin with and then go down into the global minimum, or the locally the minimum in a larger local space. These are not terribly complicated concepts to get across. I have a strong feeling that it's solvable in real time, certainly at the number of dimensions that we're talking about, because we're not talking about tens of thousands of dimensions, I don't think yet. Solving for local minimum might be relevant anyway. Certainly solving for whether or not you can get to a global maximum you can get to a global minimum so long as you explore enough of the space. Struggling
Do the EBM thing seriously.
I think modern neural networks.
What is the EBM thing?
Or
All right,
just...
I've got to pick Energy-based models, right? Okay, thank you. The prompt, actually, or not the prompt, the section heading. I think modern neural networks.
Mean approximations of EVMs, right? Like neural networks came from EVMs.
Right.
The 2024 Nobel Prize was, and Backrop came from looking at mean field of EVMs. So to us, we're just, creating the hardware for the ancestors to neural networks, and they're kind of a superset, right? You could just take averages and get deterministic operations. And so, our hope is, people think of going more probabilistic with their algorithms now that sampling is far more energy efficient and far faster. But because we've been stuck with deterministic computers, people have just tried to avoid, using primitives that have, they would just represent distributions by their moments, right? And they would use, exponential families where you don't need too many moments, such as Gaussians, right? Because you could just represent them as matrices and vectors, and matrices and vectors can fit on a GPU really well, right? And you could do some transformations there. So there's been a bias in algorithms towards what runs well on today's hardware, and hopefully with thermodynamic computers it changes that. And so we're trying to get people interested in the space and to start imagining what they would do.
Right, so my problem is, having acquired the conceptual understanding of a landscape in multidimensional space and gradient descent, I cannot understand how a probabilistic single bit or 500 bits or 1,000 probabilistic bits would help. If I have to do probabilistic, what I do is I record in silicon the random walks that I have taken, the minima that I have achieved, I mean, I could draw a diagram of this in 2 dimensions if you really want to. Do I want to do that? Why not? Let's listen to him ramble while I just get a pen out.
With, a multi-million...
This is how you break free of the...
Go ahead.
No, this is how you break free of the vicious cycle that we're stuck in, right?
Yeah, we're stuck in
a hardware stack that works in a certain way. Yep. We optimize our software for that, then we build bigger hardware. And, so this is how we break free.
Yeah, but I think we're going to break free one way or another, because frankly, even if you just do a back of the envelope calculation, well, right now we're going to run out of power trying to scale AI. We can't even, if everybody were to use like an agentic, big model, ChatGPT or Grok model, we'd run out of power in the United States. You can't deploy it to everyone. You can't have everyone using it like with high intensity right now. We're going to run out of power. And then that's not even getting into sort of video models, world models, which are going to be necessary for embodied intelligence. At that point, if you try to scale it to the planet, we're going to run out, even if we produce the power. Let's say there was some moonshot, and let's say we even figured out nuclear fusion, right? Let's say we just did that, and we scaled that very quickly. We'd run out of, or, we're going to generate more, we're going to double or triple the amount of heat being radiated by the Earth, right? So we're going to literally cook ourselves to death, right? We're literally cooked. Okay, and so something has to change at the hardware layer. We can't scale with the current hardware, and so people thinking we're just going to scale transformers and get to the moon and scale intelligence to the whole planet, they're just flat out wrong, right? It's like provably wrong.
When people say, hey, to scale up intelligence, we need to start building nuclear power plants, I always think, well, like I run on a glass of water and a banana, maybe a coffee in the morning, right? Like certainly this is not like a naturalistic way to think about how intelligence scales, right?
because you're a thermodynamic computer, right?
That's right.
That's the thesis. But you can imagine, right? Like just taking our current design and scaling it to a wafer. You would have about 1.5 billion p bits, which you could think of as neurons, and about 20 billion parameters per wafer, and then you could do multi-layered programs of those, and that would run on not 20 kilowatts, which is what a current wafer scale system would run on, or more, maybe 100. It's 20 watts, right? Which is like our brain,
Yeah,
right?
that's crazy.
And then if you have 100,
That's crazy.
or you have a few hundred billion parameter model running on 20 watts, then we're in the brain. We're in the same ballpark as the brain. Not quite it might be like within 10x, but that's still much better than where we are, which is like 100 million x, right? And so that's where we're going. And again, it's not to us. It's far less crazy than quantum computing. There is no like quantum computer in nature that has very high quantum coherence, and we have exquisite control and very high quantum complexity. All systems decohere. We have multiple.
My understanding is that photosynthesis is exactly that, but perhaps I'm wrong, because quantum coherence is not something that is easy to understand. Certainly my evolution brain doesn't. My evolved brain does not easily adjust to such concepts. But that could just be that the brain's not trained.
Billion thermodynamic computers out there in the wild, and they work pretty well. So we're just trying to tap into the same physics. We're not obsessed with sort of biomimicry. We don't call ourselves neuromorphic computing. We're just doing, again, approximate probabilistic inference as a service, but in hardware, in physics. And to us, that's kind of the parent workload of most of AI. And actually, it's not just for AI, it's for broader computing, right? There's simulation, optimization, and statistical inference, science at large can use this. So it's not just for Gen AI, right? We're not just writing the current wave. Yeah.
I have the pleasure of interviewing not one but two people.
Sure.
Today,
Yeah, we'll switch
like, I've got your yeah, exactly. Like, we've got your alter ego on the call as well. So I guess to kind of frame up the transition to discuss, because for the audience, Gil, or rather, aka Beth Jesus, is the founder of a philosophical movement called effective accelerationism, which originated as a kind of counterpoint to effective altruism, and I really want to get into the details there. But I guess to kind of set things up, like looking 10 to 20 years out, like how do you envision the future? And what role does acceleration play in your vision for the future?
Yeah, I mean,
okay, so how well did he ask that question? Well, first of all, since the guy has two personalities, he claims, I wouldn't wait an hour to find out what the second personality was. And at some point there's a shocking thing coming up, apparently, which is really all that's hanging in me to try to understand what this. I mean, sorry, that's, yeah, it's somewhat crude. He says basically he had his fingers in a granny. What?
$10 to 20 years. I think we'll have embodied intelligence. I think thermodynamic computers will be pretty ubiquitous. They're going to be what runs embodied intelligence. We're going to have greater intelligence density in all our devices. We're going to have personalized, always on online learning intelligence. And so, my goal is for everyone to
personalized online learning intelligence. Yeah, well, I can imagine.
own and control the extension of our cognition. Because that is important to
So
maintain.
democratizing intelligence.
Not just democratize, yeah, but yeah, truly, because democratizing access. It's like, hey, I give you access to the one God model that amortizes its learnings across the fleet. Now you're all mind merged with my Borg mind. Congratulations, you've been assimilated. That's not democracy, right? If you have control over its constitutional prompts, you're essentially controlling people by proxy and their thoughts and their will and their actions, right? If you control it's not just, it used to be people control people's access to information and they steer them indirectly, but now it's going to be directly controlling the model that's an extension of their cognition or their thought partner, and then that's much deeper and more subversive control. And so to me, I think that was the big existential risk that I was most worried about, was the sort of precedent of people vying for control and vying for power, right, over people.
Right.
And that's why I've been pushing for decentralized AI, and I've been pushing for sort of avoiding sort of overregulation of AI that would cause.
Right, this is much more interesting. So I'm actually now imagining I had the editorial control of how this interview is presented to the community. And I think I would have led with this because the first hour has not been particularly rewarding. What am I up to? I'm up to an hour of recording my voice and reaction, and I haven't even fucking shaved this morning. But I think a better job could be done. Cameraman needs a bloody medal, by the way.
In red tape inflation, and would mostly serve the incumbents and would cause a centralization of AI power.
That's a very good.
But yeah, I mean, someday I would imagine 10, 20 years out, hopefully, we're wearing some Neuralinks, our whole skull is some Neuralink that is the thermodynamic computer that's an extension of our cognition, and it's as powerful, or if not more powerful than your brain, and you have a full merge there. I think something more plausible on a 10-year time scale is a sort of soft merge, right? I mean, you're the active inference expert here, but if you have the same Markov blanket, right? You have the same perception and action states, right? So let's say I had an agent. Let's say my glasses were very smart and they were always on, always listening, and I have an earpiece. I could have sort of subconscious thinking, almost. It could just perceive things and suggest actions. So we're sharing perception and we're sharing actions through my body. We are the same agent, right? So that is a form of merge, and you don't need a neural interface for that, right? And maybe we even have a way to communicate non-verbally, or just like friends that hang out a lot have a prior of each other's behavior, or their behavior conditioned on the world states, and then they don't need as many bits of information to adjust to a new setting. And so that's kind of a more plausible way. I think the soft merge is going to come first, but I think people are it's going to keep escalating, and then we're going to go towards a harder merge, right? A hardware merge.
So that's a very compelling vision for the future. It's very techno-futurist. I love it. Do you want to give me the elevator pitch for EAC, effective accelerationism? So, because I think these are all related. I think this sets...
That was his elevator pitch, for fuck's sake, surely, because you asked the question. He portrayed a vision invitation to grift, isn't it?
You up nicely to kind of just present the kind of core idea. So
Yeah, I mean, really, EAC is a sort of meta culture. It's kind of, I call it like a cultural hyperparameter prescription, if you will. Um, and it's one where we're trying to maximize growth of civilization as measured by our free energy production and consumption, aka the Kardashev scale. The Kardashev scale is a log scale tracking how much free energy is consumed and produced. And really, it comes from the sort of realization as I was studying stochastic thermodynamics in preparation for founding Extropic. I realized that there was this sort of generalization of Darwinian selection, which is thermodynamic selection, where each bit, you go from selfish genes to selfish memes to selfish bits. Every bit of information specifying configurations of matter is fighting for its existence in the future. And the selection pressure on those bits of information are whether or not they can further host organisms an ability to understand their environment, predict the future, capture free energy, use it strategically, and grow. But really, the master metric is like how much, if I change this parameter, this value, and I let time evolve, how much free energy has the system dissipated through its trajectory, right, over time, right? And the theorems of stochastic thermodynamics tell us that actually trajectories of the system that have basically consume more free energy are exponentially more likely,
An experiment,
right? And so that's how you have this sort of pruning of branches that that consume less free energy. And so it's like, okay, well, this is the golden metric of sort of selection pressure on the space of bits. And so I will design the highest fitness selfish meme that is EAC, which is figure out what is optimal for growth and do it. And so by construction, it should be the most viral thing, and it will persist.
Right.
and surprise.
The assumption there is basically the alternative is basically growth or death is what you're suggesting, right?
Yeah, we have the saying accelerate or die. I mean, it sounds
growth or death, grow or die, which earlier on was introduced as, well, they describe it as a core principle. It's looking a long way out. It's like the opposite of gradient descent. It's like, how do we escape the planet? How do we escape the solar system? How do we escape the galaxy? Kardashev scale. This is a deeply philosophical question, but it's not actually something that I don't know. You see, multimodal learning is what I'm trying to develop here. These words that are on the screen, I am suspect of. The words I am hearing in my head, I am suspect of. The brain is open to both being changed, and I have to overcome social conditioning, which is distrust and envy. But I am damned if I did it. All right. Infinite growth on a finite planet.
dramatic, but it's meant to sound dramatic,
Let's go up the
but it's
volume
also,
again, 'cause I can't
reality.
stand
It's
the
either
reverb.
you align yourself with growth and you are part of it, right? So whether you adopt your culture, you adapt your culture towards growth, and then you're part of the growth and you benefit, or you don't, and then you get outgrown. And whether it's at a national level, right, with your policies, right? Again, EU versus US. US is obsessed with growth to some extent, and we've seen a sort of bifurcation, in the GDPs and so on. So at a policy level, at a cultural level, even at an organization level, right? If a company is not obsessed with growth, eventually it just gets disrupted by one that outgrows them and then has more resources to outcompete them, right? And so I think the point is that essentially, if people are open-minded about new technologies and in general and lean in, they will be positive. They will be selected for, and the people that are skeptical, push them away, shun them away, want to go back to the cave, get selected out. And so, even from an empathetic argument standpoint, trying to popularize acceleration, like awareness that actually this is how the world works. I'm sorry to break it to you. You either embrace the acceleration or you get selected out. It's also kind of like, hey, if you care about yourself and your tribe, your company, whatever, you should lean in rather than lean out, and don't listen to the people telling you, fear mongering you. They're actually very often doing so out of self-interest, and it's an actual form. I view it. I view spreading deceleration as a form of warfare that is psychological. In fact, that's how I view it, and that's why I've been such a warrior online against the decel mindset. I just don't see a scenario where being decel is beneficial to the host, and in fact it's just exploiting this gap in understanding of how the world works to destroy competition, right? And I mean, there's a lot of this in nature and in general in human dynamics. People kind of sabotage each other to outcompete each other.
See, I've been thinking about this a lot. My good friend and colleague Axel Constant actually, and I have a long-standing debate as to whether ethics, morality, and this kind of thing can be reduced to free energy minimization at the end of the day. And I think it's a kind of difficult question, because thermodynamics, right, describes all mesoscale objects, right? So basically any configuration whatsoever will be minimizing free energy in this fashion, right? Like, seeking to find pockets of free energy and dissipating it as efficiently as possible. I guess my worry is that things that grow without bounds. I mean, in the biological case, you have like cancer, for example. So I guess, like, what's the role of constraints in the maximization of entropy when we're kind of designing the social system? Because surely, things like, dictatorships, fascist autocracies, those also minimize free energy. And you might even think
they're a local optimum, right? They're not a global, right? Just like a cancer is like it kills the host, and that's suboptimal on a sufficient time scale. Again, it's not an instantaneous free energy dissipation, right? It's basically infinite time horizon, right? And so actually blowing up the planet does burn up a bunch of free energy, but in the long term, you actually it's the same reason life exists. It's much better to sort of conserve and strategically use free energy to secure more free energy and keep growing and have some order rather than just like burn all and then go and have chaos, right? And thermalize in one go, right? Again, that's why we have life. That's why we're not at equilibrium, right? We're not just burning up all our fuel and just dying immediately, because as intelligent beings, we burn way more energy by being this sort of partially somewhat coherent system that has predictive power of its environment, and we're kind of this energy-seeking fire, right? And yeah, I mean, but this is, I would argue that, EAC is also, it's kind of a call to kind of popularizing complexism and complex systems thinking and the free energy principle at large. And we have to think through this lens about all systems in society, from policymaking to technology to innovation to basically everything, economics. And it's a different way of thinking, one that is somewhat scary. Again, it's again going from reductionism and rationalism to sort of complexism and post-rationalism, and we don't have as much control and interpretability. We don't understand the world as well, right? We kind of have to, pardon my French, but fuck around and find out, the FAFO algorithm, right? But really it's kind of like exploration and discovery, right? You kind of, a priority, don't know what's optimal, right? And in startups, you kind of learn this, you have to actually go out in the market and try stuff. Sometimes your model-based prior can't do that well because the system is too complex to have a model that has good predictive power. You actually have to be in a sort of open loop. I would say that yeah, hopefully there's kind of a renaissance, and these ideas become more popular in all sorts of fields of science. Clearly, it's eaten the software world, and we're trying to make this sort of school of thought eat the hardware world. And I think we will do it. But again, most fields of study could be revolutionized by sort of thinking through the lens of complex self-adaptive systems and the free energy principle.
So, I mean, you've described EAC as a kind of hyperstitious meme. Do you wanna say a few words about what that means?
Yeah, I mean, because again, you're the active inference expert. In active inference, you have perception and action, right? You can update your, based on your input sensory information, you can update your model of the world. So you're minimizing divergence of your model, of your own internal model, to the statistics of the world. But then the dual of that is taking actions in the world to minimize divergence between the world and your predictive model of it, right? And in a way, we're just naturally biased towards, in a way that the car goes where the eyes look, right, when you're driving. And if we look at very negative outcomes and we're obsessed with them, we will drive whatever system we're thinking about towards those negative outcomes. An example of this, an example slightly controversial, is bioweapons research. And for example, COVID, right? I would say that COVID was an accident from bioweapons research. It was probably defensive, and we were trying to explore what would be a really bad scenario. What if we had, this mutation and this mutation would combine, and it would be a really bad virus? And then they start experimenting and designing in that neighborhood of virus subspaces that would have never occurred naturally, right? Just from evolution. But because we were exploring that subspace of bad things, because we're obsessed with it, we made it happen, right? And so, to me, it's like, if we're optimistic about the future, we tend to steer things towards that optimistic outcome. As a startup founder, if you're not optimistic about your startup, statistically you are screwed, right? Because
from the active inference point of view, every action begins with a false belief, right? So first you believe that you're moving, and then you reduce the prediction error in the direction of action, right? So
exactly.
I find this extremely compelling. I mean, one of the things I find most inspiring about EAC is that you're trying to present a radically optimistic meaning for the future, and I think there's so much, not just AI doomerism, but there's so much doom and gloom going around. That just from the point of view of neurobiology, we need these kind of almost seemingly delusionally optimistic beliefs to get off the ground anyway.
Yeah, right? I mean, you could think of the mimetic sphere as a meta cortex, right? It's a biological supercomputer. And EAC, we're just trying to do active inference towards better futures, right? So we're spreading this meme.
What was that about? Let's go back to the beginning of this section. EAC as an optimistic view of the future. EAC stands for energy efficient computing, no. Well, hopefully it explains what EAC is at the beginning, having explained what principle of growth or death is.
Do you want to say a few words about what that means?
Yeah, I mean, because again, you're the active inference expert. In active inference, you have perception and action, right? You can update your, based on your input sensory information, you can update your model of the world. So you're minimizing divergence of your model, of your own internal model, to the statistics of the world. But then the dual of that is taking actions in the world to minimize divergence between the world and your predictive model of it, right? And in a way, we're just naturally biased towards, in a way that the car goes where the eyes look, right, when you're driving.
Right.
And if we look at very negative outcomes and we're obsessed with them, we will drive whatever system we're thinking about towards those negative outcomes. An example of this,
Right.
an example slightly controversial,
Is
bioweapons research. And for example, COVID, right? I would say that COVID was an accident from bioweapons research. It was probably defensive, and we were trying to explore what would be a really bad scenario. What if we had, this mutation and this mutation would combine, and it would be a really bad virus? And then they start experimenting and designing in that neighborhood of virus subspaces that would have never occurred naturally, right? Just from evolution. But because we were exploring that subspace of bad things, because we're obsessed with it, we made it happen, right? And so, to me, it's like, if we're optimistic about the future, we tend to steer things towards that optimistic outcome. As a startup founder, if you're not optimistic about your startup, statistically you are screwed, right? Because
from the active inference point of view, every action begins with a false belief, right? So first you believe that you're moving, and then you reduce the prediction error in the direction of action, right? So
exactly.
I find this extremely compelling. I mean, one of the things I find most inspiring about EAC is that you're trying to be you're trying to present a radically optimistic meme for the future. And I think, there's so much, not just AI doomerism, but there's so much doom and gloom going around that just from the point of view of neurobiology, we need these kind of almost seemingly delusionally optimistic beliefs to get off the ground anyway.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you could think of the mimetic sphere as a meta cortex, right? It's a biological supercomputer. And EAC, we're just trying to do active inference towards better futures, right? So we're spreading this meme of optimistic futures, and it actually does steer the world. And, it's been 3 years now, and it has steered policies throughout the world towards, going for these moonshots and resurgence of, exploration of nuclear energy, the climate Kardashev deal, deregulation of AI, widespread embrace of AI, companies being far more aggressive in their exploration of it, overall.
So how do we spread it?
Yeah.
How do we spread EAC? I guess my question is kind of motivated. I think most of the very visible EAC figures, Andreessen, Musk and company, they tend to be, libertarian, right-wing associated.
That happened after the fact, right? So I would say, Gary Tan is rather on the left, and initially it was very apolitical. I would consider myself still a centrist and kind of, not hitting.
Well, how do we get the Abundance Bros to join?
I think it's already happening. I think that was a reaction to to EOC in kind of the techno-optimist, you kind of end up getting clustered with one party in the U.S. In other countries it might be different, but there needed to be like actual techno-progressive, let's say, versus techno-regressive, cluster on the left. It's not clear that that faction is kind of the dominant faction of Democrats. I really hope it becomes that. Again, EOC is kind of like, it's kind of like an RL algorithm. It's not clear what the optimal policy is.
Right.
I think a few years ago I was seeing a sort of convergence towards a lot of top-down control, a lot of top-down power.
Yeah.
And I think the optimal is always balanced. You need some top-down control, but you also need sort of bottom-up self-organization.
That's how the brain works, right?
Exactly.
Like, you have a little bit of centralization, but not all that much centralization. Right?
Exactly, right? And I think like absolute total libertarianism, it can work. It's just in the era of sort of unconventional warfare, complex systems also get adversarially steered, right? Whether it's free markets, they get gamed, or mimetic markets, right? There's psychological operations, and so on and so forth, dating markets. And so I think some balance of top down and bottom up is the ideal. Is it more like the U.S.? Is it more like China? Or something in between? I guess we have to figure out. But that should be.
That segues perfectly into my next question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for you, this isn't just like a philosophical thing. This is like of geopolitical, geostrategic significance, right? Like, this is important for the future of, like, democracy.
How did the cameraman know to get the eyebrow rise at that point? Has he got multiple cameras on it?
Do we understand it?
Yeah, I would say that our failure to view the world as a complex self-adaptive system, and still thinking in kind of the classical view of like, hey, I have a first-order model of what's happening, and I'm going to do a first-order correction, right? And it's easy to convince a crowd of that, and politicians get elected on such platforms, but then they don't think of the higher-order effects of their policies, right? And instead of thinking at it from a complex systems steering standpoint, and whereas I think our adversaries of the West understand the complex systems approach, and they tend to steer us in directions that lead to our detriment. And to me, it was like, okay, how do you fight a multi-dimensional war, where there's like invisible sabotage of every complex system that can be steered adiabatically in nefarious directions, and if it's slow enough, then it's kind of above the infrared temporal cutoff that politicians give a shit about, which is 4 years, right? So if you're steering the United States through the West on a 20 to 40-year time scale, you could win a very long war, and we don't even find the pattern because we're too busy. There's a sort of timescale separation here, similar to what happens in thermodynamic computing and thermodynamic physics. But essentially, we're so preoccupied with the dynamics that occur on small time scales of day to day that we kind of ignore the long trends, and those get sort of hacked, right? We slowly boil the frog. It doesn't realize it. And so
in listening to you talk, it occurs to me that like there's a beautiful coherence to your approach generally, right? Because what you're doing both at the hardware level and at the level of your philosophical project is essentially kind of moving us away from hard, rigid programming from the outside towards a kind of organic, adaptive, thermodynamic-driven kind of learning and exploration of possibility space.
Yes. I mean,
So now I'm an hour and 13 minutes in, and I'm finding more resonance. And I would never have got here without a thing called perseverance. It's as though It's as though these local minima are my trigger points, and actually I want to get to this point of peace. And all of the forgiving that I did for the ineloquence in the initial hour is paying off. And I think that's... How far in have I got? I'm now at one... I'm now exceeding the amount of time that it would have taken to watch the video uninterrupted. Is my contribution to this video cost effective of my time and other people's time? No. But I still think some of what I have had to say about this is significant, and I think my thinking has moved forward, and I'm glad I've watched the video this long. Now, as a download dump of memes, which is what I guess I am seeking to do in my personal field of study, have I been effective? No. Because everything works on elevator pitch. The identification of narrow-mindedness.
Again, it came from my own journey trying to understand physics and kind of discovering differentiable programming and seeing that as the way forward for everything, right? And really, you know, some of the prescription.
Right, so what's differential programming? It's not goal directed? Does it mean that, or does it mean differential in this sense of and now I'm about to outsource my thinking on this, outsource my response to my AI, because I'm about to think, let's take this section, get some text, strip out all the ums and the ahs and the whatevers. Beautiful soup. Is a clever name, isn't it? From the garbage I can make beautiful soup. Oh, sigh, sigh, sigh.
Options of YAC or to maintain variance and constantly explore across any parameter space, whether it's culture, aesthetics, policy, technology, etc. And one of the reasons is that, you know, according to Fisher's theories on evolution, you know, the speed at which you can traverse a landscape, of course, it depends on the gradient, but also depends on the variance, right? Evolutionary search depends on variance, because the more you fuck around, the more you find out, right? And so your rate of learning is faster, and your rate of adaptation is faster. And to me, that seemed like the main advantage of the United States, is that the United States is very high variance, right? They have high variance individuals, and they have high variance outcomes. And so I view the United States as a sort of high temperature search algorithm, and they're always first to and I'm not American yet officially, but you know, someday I will.
Someday I will, because you speak English. Is that your thought? Your most profound thought, that you would align with the high temperature when you're all about low temperature physics? You're all about the long game, and you don't speak Chinese. Bit like me. But my conclusion is I'm not going to America. It's pathetic, really, isn't it? It's like watching a 3-year-old no, not a 3-year-old.
Oh, that's my goal. But you know, they're first to figure things out because they're always searching in very high variance. Like I view it as a sort of, I view sort of innovation as a diffusion process in some landscape, and they're in very high noise regimes, so they don't get stuck in local optima.
Well, we're back to this, aren't we? Gradient descent. This gradient descent is about making it coarse enough to begin with in order to traverse it without a... It's like the Markov blanket, or whatever it is called. It needs to be draped over a surface in such a way that it does not drop down everywhere. The probability of landing on a mountaintop is low, and you have no... and you must simultaneously do... yeah, that would be it. The concept here is like negative prompting in image generation. You would ascend before descending. It's like any change in gradient is interesting because the other side of a mountain might contain a steeper rate of decline. So in a 500 multi-dimensional space, you need to drape your Markov blanket coarsely and gradually increase the elasticity of the stretch fabric that's being used. And as you approach what you strongly suspect is a global minimum, you can increase the grainedness, the granularity, I believe is the word we use, of your blanket. Something like this.
Right, whereas you know, I would say China is more kind of like the low temperature sampler. They're the kind of the optimizer at the end. They're doing the gradient descent, right? Once there's consensus, right? Once there's a clear gradient of direction of improvement, right? It's easy to convince a committee at that point, and then you can just execute top-down control with a lot of conviction. And so they beat us in the final stretch when sort of, you know, you have, it's kind of like Bayesian inference. You go from a unsharp prior to a sharper posterior. I mean, that's the optimal thing, right? It's like annealing, right? And so essentially China beats us at squeezing the end, again, because they're fully kind of, they have a lot more top-down control power and a lot more coherence there. So I see this sort of we're kind of like a parallel tempering algorithm between the United States, the high temperature search and discovering things first, and then you don't, you know, the optimizing and improving the technologies and scaling and manufacturing, they're not necessarily the best. And then China.
Well, then how do we avoid catastrophic outcomes in that because you've been pretty dismissive about, like, you know, P-doom and doomerism generally. So how do we, you know, allow the kind of, you know, meta search to happen, but in a way that doesn't lead to, you know, a catastrophic, like, technological outcomes, or, you know, because I can also see some kind of tension between on the one hand this kind of open project, and on the other hand, like, you know, the participation of, like, proprietary closed corporate groups. Like,
yeah, I guess, you know, for me, P90 1984 was higher than P-doom from AI, right? And so I think, you know, to me, I think China is kind of, China is like the ultimate monopolistic company, right? There's basically one set of executives for all the companies. They're acting like a conglomerate, and they throw their weight around to crush American smaller companies. And so, you know, I would say that one thing about IAC is that we're kind of anti-monopolistic, because, again, monopolies tend to be suboptimal. Again, if you have choices of hyperparameters that are over-concentrated, you're not exploring anymore. And
you see, that sort of motivates my question and my worry is that, you know, like, very authoritarian forms of government where we impose kind of, like, you know, ethnic or cultural homogeneity, like, those are very good at minimizing free energy, right? If you and I are exactly alike because there's, like, a top-down imposition of sameness, right, then you know that minimizes free energy super well.
Locally,
like, if
locally, right? It's like,
right.
Well, you know, if your energy term has, like, you know, if you want to agree with your neighbor and so on, have no frustration, then of course, like, that's a local optimum. But as we know, like, what we're arguing for is embracing variance, right? Embracing different culture, having different bets, right? Like, even you know, it could be, you know, culture, genetics, it could be ways to even train your ML models, right? I would say that actually we've had
the same response to the cancer thing, right? Like, you're not worried about the push towards, you know, boundless growth leading to cancer type formations, because it's not a global optimum, it's a local optimum.
Yeah, that's right. I want to go on a slight tangent here that you know, I think, like, for example, there's been some centralization in AI research labs, you know, even though there's like 4 or 5 players that matter. They kind of churn. I mean, it's kind of been a meme recently that researchers, they kind of all slosh around and they all churn between each other. So they're all kind of equilibrating in terms of beliefs, right? Because you have exchange of particles of researchers between the labs. And you could see that, like, the American research labs all converge to similar amounts of performance at similar compute. And then, you know, China with DeepSeek was exploring a whole different region of hyperparameter space due to its export control constraints, and then showed us that over-concentrating our bets in hyperparameter space has risks, because we're stuck in a local optimum, and there might be a better non-local global optimum, right? And that we're missing. And so, you know, again, it's just been our push for variance there, in order to always be exploring. I think it's really important. I think it's really, you know, I think basically there's also been a reaction to sort of yeah, it's hard to explain. It's kind of like the same pattern that happens, you know, in Western governments and late stage corporations, in large bureaucracies. There's a sort of cover your ass sort of mentality and culture and decision decision by committee, and so it tends to be variance reducing, right, or variance killing, and taking
Yeah, and
sort
that's
of
sort of my worry. And in addition, I guess
was the decision to develop DeepSeek centrally planned? Shall we ask that? I probably won't ask it directly in that way. But I might as well, because each conversation is isolated, I'm told. Are DeepSeek's founders less covered? What does that mean? Tsinghua University. Go away. Yes. All of that. How open source idealism pays the rent. Interesting. And the AI refers to Ye and Fu, meaning, is that their first name or their second name or their familiar? It's their second name. I think that's not their familiar name. $236 billion parameters total, but only 21 billion active per query. Trained on 8.1 trillion tokens. Now, yesterday I was actually recalling the specific tokens from an index. I had another conversation with AI about what tokens actually are. Are they is it a what's the expression? Is it a dictionary, or is it some kind of, yeah, well, that doesn't matter. It's trained on 8.1 trillion tokens. Context allows 128,000 tokens. Fill in the middle optimized great code completion. 2 trillion tokens. GitHub Stack Overflow, etc. DeepSeek R1. Pure decoder architecture. Helpful, harmless, and honest dialogue. Totally free, open weights, Apache 2.0 license. Fast and cheap inference, small teams can self-host. Tencent. Smarter, leaner, open, and truly useful. Reject scale is all you need. Build in China for the world. Love it. Business model, open source does not equal no revenue. Pro Tools, future paid cloud hosting and fine tuning. Enterprise solutions. Research partnerships with Tsinghua, Shanghai AI Lab, etc. Why it works. Community trust, adoption, feedback, better models, pro users, developers. Wins developer love first. What's next? On-device AI. Yeah, okay. Open source isn't a charity, it's a strategy. Right, let's start with alignment. And I'll send a smiley. No, I'll send a cool. Western RLHF. Wait, did they mean... Don't bottle out on me now. Gloves off this time. Scratch his head. Let me unpack what they're really after. Oh, see, you're doing it again. Guanzi. Guanzi. Rumors. Private VCs. Wait, stay open. This is the manifesto. I'm all in. Let go. Okay. Thank you. Should I just... There is a program. Gosh, I'm crying and I'm recording myself on TV. Oh, come on. Holy text. Right, okay, maybe. No. Let's not change the subject. Yeah. I think I need to take a break. Well, that's good, isn't it? 2 hours 22 minutes. 2 hours 22 minutes of emotional engagement.